Hello, beautiful divine humanity. So, some of you have been asking since I made this recent post about AI, about this, what I call quite an enlightening moment that I had with AI, where I finally sort of had an insight about the benefits of AI. Because if you follow my work and my writings, you know I'm quite a vehement critic of science and technology, and we're going to get into that today because one of the things I talked about in that piece was how AI was going to really challenge our sense of morality, that the powers of AI as they continue to evolve and unfold are unleashing, or rather bestowing, an incredible power on humanity, perhaps one of the greatest powers that we've ever had to use. And we are going to be tasked with being very moral in how we use AI, or else we are going to cause a lot of damage to ourselves and to other life forms on this beautiful heavenly earth. And I mentioned the example of how AI has already been rolled out for uses in military operations. The Israeli army has been using an AI technology, tragically called the gospel, to help them find bombing targets in Gaza, which is not good. And the fact that that's already been rolled out is, to me, disturbing. So some of you are asking, hey, could you extrapolate on this whole morality issue? Because I just broached it and touched on it very lightly in that piece. And so I thought about writing another piece, but I thought, you know what? I'm going to just disseminate through what I call a wisdom warrior transmission some of these ideas. So let's get into this. Let's start off by just defining morality. And morality, as I find in the etymology of the word, tends to mean a doctrine or a system of ethical duties. It also can mean virtuousness, which is very interesting. The word virtue and to be virtuous is something I'm very passionate about, because the Taoist wisdom of the ancient Orient, there's a lot of amazing stuff on this virtue idea. And good conduct, this idea of good, which is interesting as well. So in my piece, I argued that humanity has kind of lost its moral sense. And I don't think this is a stretch for people. I think if you look at world politics right now, and you look at, for instance, what's happening in the Middle East, the fact that war continues to conflagrate upon the planet. If you look at the US election and the divisiveness and the poor conduct on both sides of how they're berating each other, insulting each other. And when you look at the continued ecocide of the planet due to this overly anthropomorphic perspective, meaning overly human-centric perspective, where we've lost a whole animistic sense of morality, in the sense that animism means this kind of idea that all things have spirit, have sentience in a way. Indigenous peoples live by these ethics, that all of the earth is our family, and that we belong to the earth doesn't belong to us. And that eco-spiritual sensibility is what has led to a lot of the moral conduct of Indigenous people, which is quite admirable, I might add, and something we can learn from. So morality is, to me, very bereft in the world. There's not a lot of examples or paragons of truly ethical human beings acting out in the world, at least, or for the most part, on the world stage. I would argue that we're seeing a lot of sociopathic behavior by our politicians, even psychopathic behavior. And I know it's been increasingly disturbing to people to witness the pathological lying and deceptions, which to me are immoral. If one is in a state of good conduct and virtuousness, one of the most important things would be honesty. would be to be a truthful being. Because deception and lying really, really muddles things up, and it gets us into a lot of dangers. So where I'd like to zoom out for a moment is, if you follow my work, you know that I'm a huge student of ancient wisdom. And one of the chief reasons for this is that I pretty firmly believe that humanity at some point severed and disconnected itself from certain wisdoms. Some might call them the wisdom of the ages, this idea of a universal wisdom tradition that was distributed across many different cultures. Many different cultures recognized this more universal sense of truth. The ancient mystery schools that used to be all over Eurasia, for example, were said to hold this great wisdom, these great teachings, and they were very involved in teaching humanity how to be very moral, very ethical, very virtuous beings, which involved actually a lot of studies of mysticism, particularly acknowledging where we came from, where humanity came from, which, according to the great mystery schools, was a very divine source, a very good source inherently. But what I've discovered is that over time there was a strange kind of conflict within the human species, where forces of humanity suddenly became very interested in power, particularly power over other humans, and started to create these monolithic colonizing empires. And there's a lot of war and conquesting, particularly in the last couple millennia. And it's a very how should I say, a very solemn tale of our story. In fact, it's very quasi-depressing to see this. And so that's very, I've grown to be very sad about all of that. But it's also given me a lot of awakening into our woundedness. And this is very important, very, very important. You have to be a moral person, I believe, entails being authentic. And you have to be authentic means you should have a very deep understanding of your wounds. This, to me, is one of the most important things that we need to see more of in our leaders, a humility, to be aware of our woundedness. Now, the bigger problem here is a lot of us are completely ignorant of our wounds. As one Gnostic teacher once taught, we are ignorant of our ignorance. And this is why I've been very interested in ancient wisdom, because I've been kind of stalking, to borrow a shamanic term, or tracking this woundedness to figure out, how did we get to a point where we're living in a modern society where we have completely divorced ourselves from the ecosystem, and we are destroying our home planet. We are destroying our environment to the point where it may not even be habitable for our future generations, for our children. In fact, as I am speaking, most of us are dealing with tremendous toxins in our water systems, in our air systems, in our food systems, all because people started to put profit motives ahead of universal care for life. And this is sociopathic behavior, and I would say even psychopathic behavior. This is very immoral on a grand scale. And when you truly see this, you have a very sobering moment. It's horrifying, in fact, to really, really witness how wounded humanity has become. So, when it comes to AI, my chief concern with AI is that wounded consciousness has not been checked, has not even healed. To speak of healing, we're not even recognizing the tremendous woundedness. Now, if you speak to indigenous peoples who have been colonized, a lot of them can tell you very clearly what is the wounds of Western civilization, because they have been victimized by it. They've got a hard look at this perpetrator that lives in a lot of us, whether we like to admit it or not. So the consciousness behind AI, to me, is the thing that I am holding, to borrow a samurai proverb or idea, axiom. You hold the sword closest to your own throat, but I'm holding the sword closest to the throat of this consciousness behind behind AI, because I'm deeply concerned that our morality is not up to the task yet. Hence why I've been very disturbed to see AI already being used by such armies as the Israeli army in Gaza. And if you have noticed, especially earlier this year when AI sort of hit the mainstream, there was a lot of executive scientists who were leaving Google programs, and some of them had to sign like non-disclosure agreements. So we didn't know why they were leaving, but there seemed to be this constant flow of people all of a sudden jumping ship. Now, this is my intuition, so this isn't based on any fact, but my intuition was that probably some of these scientists were well-meaning people. I mean, Oppenheimer, the movie, is a perfect example. And they were probably involved in a scientific exploration of AI, because a lot of science is funded by the military, unfortunately, the military-industrial complex. And they probably were doing what they thought was their good work. And then when they reach a certain point, they start to see potentially their inventions and their thought process being siphoned into agendas that they probably didn't agree with, may even have seen as being immoral and dark. So to just get back to this wound of how did we become so immoral, let's just say. So I've mentioned this many times before, and I'm going to just say it again. One of the most important texts that you can read, and I really believe this should be canonical, meaning all of humanity should read this text right now, because AI is becoming so integrated in our lives. And if we're not careful to be aware of our woundedness, we could be truly manipulated in a way that may be very dangerous. And this book that I've mentioned many times, I mean, during the pandemic, even 2020, I was speaking about AI a lot. And it's called The Religion of Technology, the Divinity of Man, and the Spirit of Invention by David F. Noble. And this is a text that I studied at university, because I studied actually AI and transhumanism over 20 years ago at university through an amazing professor. And this book really helps to highlight how this woundedness in our humanity, what the Gnostics, because I'm also a very big student of this Gnostic wisdom, because it is my belief that some of this mystery school wisdom that we are recovering, that we are remembering now, thanks to the internet. And this is the thing, we're beyond polarizations, okay? We are also going through this incredible time of awakening, despite the fact that we are also awakening to the horrifying wounds of our collective. We can take tremendous heart in knowing we are in a prophetic time, a time that has been prophesied of a great awakening of human consciousness, a divine comeback. And I have been studying a lot of this Gnostic wisdom because I believe, as the internet has all of a sudden allowed a lot of these texts to be disseminated again, texts that were hidden, that were hard to find, these are the threads of wisdom that were suppressed by powers of empire. Because if you think about it, and a power of empire is based on what's known as a dominator hierarchy. So you have a social system of elites at the top who are basically living off the labor of all the people below, and they're holding this power of domination. And moreover, they're holding on to that power. They don't want to give it up. And this is happening today. We see it in the political sphere, all these billionaires who we're supposed to worship as our saviors and such. But there's a lot of dark dealings going on behind the scenes. So I really believe this Gnostic wisdom, which was more about a true equanimity in culture, a true harmonization of peoples, of unity consciousness, of a much more noble culture, which is not based on a dominator hierarchy system. There's nothing wrong with hierarchy, I should say. Hierarchy is natural, but hierarchy is flexible and nimble. It moves. In one moment, I may hold the hierarchical top position of being an expert on a certain subject, and then in an instant, we may change the subject, and you may be the expert, and we both have to be nimble enough to be able to move in this space. And this is how nature moves. It's in this constant flow state. But what we see in our culture for now millennia is we see this monolithic, very solidified, densified power systems where we have these people at the top who don't want to give up their ability, their power over us. And they often enforce that power through violence, which is, very visceral, domineering behavior. So this Gnostic wisdom was a challenge to that and was suppressed. I mean, most of the mystery schools were destroyed. If you were deemed an indigenous pagan, which was a slang term of belittlement of people who did not believe in the Abrahamic religions, you were terminated, basically, genocided. And there's great genocides that are not talked about in our history. And this is, we know this, right? It's cliche. History is written by the victors. So we should all swallow that bitter pill that we've all been told false stories, or only a very limited story of an account of our human story. And of course, we want to get the full story, because then we get to truth. Then we get to be, activate knowledge into wisdom. It's very important. It's like if you have a health symptom, you want to get the proper diagnosis. You want to know what's going on so that you can realize how you can truly respond. And this is part of the problem, is truth has been hidden from humanity to keep us kind of off-kilter, off-centered. And now we live in this great time where the truth is coming back, which is profound. So one of the things that David F. Noble highlights in this book is that this woundedness, which he really charts as being based on the Abrahamic religions, particularly Judeo-Christianity, but eventually this infection of deception, these deceivings, were transferred as well into Islam. You can start to chart the generalizations of these wounds. A lot of it is based on disembodiment, of seeing this world as a fallen place that we are allowed to manipulate, do whatever we want to, which is kind of the root of why we become such perpetrators of environmental violence on all life forms on this planet, all the elements. It's because we've been told by these monolithic powers, hey, you know what? This Earth is a piece of shit planet. It's done. It's a fallen world. We are supposed to ascend off planet to some heaven up there in the cosmos, in the sky. Do whatever you want down here. That's literally what we've been conditioned to believe. And if you didn't believe that, you were killed. This is literally how history, what we're told by his story. So this went on, and then, of course, in the 17th century, you had, ironically, what's called the Enlightened period, where you have the rise of modern science, materialist science, not science, because let's remember, science is literally just any rigorous form or method to come to some understanding of truth. So when people say, oh, you're anti-science, no, I'm anti-materialist, empirical, positivist, modern science, quantitative science, because if you really analyze it, it has some huge problems. One of the biggest ones right now is that this kind of modern empirical science is owned by corporations that are having a horrendous distorting influence on science by filtering it through the profit motive. We see this with Big Pharma and the suppression of all the natural medicines because they don't make money, ironically. Nature, Earth is always usurping this dominator money system, isn't it? So what we have to understand here is, I'm going to read some passages from David F. Noble's book because it's very important to realize. And one of the big themes that I want us to hold in our mind around this whole AI thing is I'm going to be talking a lot about disembodiment, the disembodied wound. Because the Abrahamic faiths are based on this disembodied wound. If you go back to the original creation story of Adam and Eve, the Garden of Eden, when Adam and Eve go through this fall, the first thing they do is they cover their naked bodies in shame. There's something about the body that is seen as shameful. And I believe, as a lot of these Gnostics believed and were trying to warn us, that this story was manipulated, that there may have been some esoteric truths therein, but the shaming of the body, of our genitals and also our sexuality, was actually a tool of distortion to, on a very essential and deep level, pull humanity off of its center. Because as indigenous wisdom will tell you, the body and nature is the center. That is where true wisdom intelligence comes from being embodied. So with that being said, here's something that one of the father figures of empirical science, René Descartes, said. Now, René Descartes, of course, famously said, "I think, therefore I am." And he was a very Christian man, very, very, almost like a zealot. "I think, therefore I am." And of course, that's a very patriarchal thing to say, isn't it? That's just highlighting the masculine. Because there is a feminine part of our humanity, which is, "I feel, therefore I am." So a true, in my mind, a true and sane understanding would be, "I think and feel, and therefore I am." But of course, inherent to the shaming of the body, of nature itself, there was also shaming of woman and the feminine in Christianity. And this is why I wrote in 2020, to great controversy, a lot of people were very triggered by this, which to me is a good sign. You know, sometimes if we get triggered, it means, ooh, truth has really like hit us deep and it's stirring something. And I wrote that AI is the pinnacle of misogyny. And the reason I said that, I'm going to get into that now. So René Descartes, this is what he said. The body is always a hindrance to the mind and its thinking. The body is always a hindrance to the mind and its thinking. Descartes argued, which is contradicted by the many preconceptions of our senses. So, in the wake of Copernicus and Galileo, Descartes was keenly aware that mere sense perception could not provide a true scientific understanding of the universe, and might indeed retard such understanding. So that is very interesting to me. Very interesting, because if you are a student of Eastern mysticism, as I am, the yogis, they literally sat out in nature like the Taoists, the forest-dwelling sages they were called, and they used sense perception, but particularly inner sense perception, to arrive at tremendous cosmic truths. Hence, if you read the Vedas or the Gita, tremendous wisdom. So Descartes right here, obviously not a student, not very respectful of that inner sense or sense perception in general. But that's like, wow, that's quite a statement. Francis Bacon, who created the scientific method, which is like the tool whereupon we learn about nature, and he famously said, "Let us put Mother Nature on the torture rack and rape her for her secrets." That's the guy who created the scientific method. And of course, if you think about it, the scientific method is an element of rape, because it's all based on taking nature outside of its natural continuum into a laboratory, like cutting it out, and then assuming that nature is going to act in the same way in the laboratory. And of course, the scientific method has fallen to absolute pieces. And science, empirical scientists don't want people to know this. But the replicability rate of lab experiments, which is supposed to be the golden seal of truth in science, has been dwindling and descending tremendously and accelerating in its descent. So it's not working, actually, anymore. And of course, there's quantum physics, which burgeoned 100 years ago and was highly suppressed for a long time because it was such a challenge to all of this. mechanistic, more empirical science. Quantum physics tells us the observer effect, because we're all entangled, we're all unified, that of course when you carry out an experiment, you will inherently bias the experiment just from your energy. So very profound stuff going on here. Now, and then if you see the rise of empirical science, which led to industrialization, and then this mass migration out of pastoral villages into these big cities, and empirical science really weaponized industrial science to become this absolutely behemoth of desecrating the environment, which is the great Holocaust that no one talks about, all the loss of life of all these innocent life forms that are non-human. And this very fact that we cannot see these life forms as part of our greater extended family of life, to me, is also a sign of our woundedness that is causing our immorality. Now, I would say a much more moral person would be using technology to uplift, to heal our wounds, to make sure that we are reintegrated into the ecology of this planet, because it's very holy. But of course, that doesn't take place because a lot of these hardened egos are ignorant of the wounds, and then of course, when people are told about their wounds, they're often too stubborn to look into them. So I'm gonna share a few more passages from David F. Noble's book, because what ends up happening with a lot of these initial AI gurus, they're literally called AI gurus, like Earl Cox. This is in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. As these ideas start to come forward, you start to see the woundedness being expressed through their ideas, and it's, I think, quite shocking. So here's a passage. The full-blown transcendent vision of the savants of artificial intelligence was recently presented by AI guru Earl Cox, an authority on the design of so-called fuzzy logic systems, in his book Beyond Humanity, Cyber Revolution and Future Mind, co-authored with paleontologist Gregory Paul. Cox argues that exponentially accelerating advances in science and technology have sped up the course of evolution, outdistancing their creators. We are thus already at the twilight of human civilization and the dawn of a new robotic super civilization, which will remake the entire universe in its digital image. Happily, he advises, Homo sapiens need not be completely left behind as the dinosaurs were. Oh, thank you. Technology will soon enable human beings to change into something else together and thereby escape the human condition. Because remember, according to this religious wound that has been transferred into science through zealots like René Descartes, and as it infected the minds of people in Europe, for example, all this religiosity and all the suppression, the death of all our natural mystical traditions, it then wasn't healed like a virus. It just maintained in the host body, eventually transferred over to Western science. So that goes on. Earl Cox says, technology will soon enable human beings to change into something else together and thereby escape the human condition, as if the human condition is something really bad. Which, of course, we're told with the doctrine of original sin that, oh, we're originally sinful, and why there's this deep misanthropy or hatred of our humanity held in a lot of these religious ideas that have become the very bedrock of Western civilization. Humans may be able to transfer their minds into the new cyber systems and join the cyber civilization, securing for themselves an eternal existence. This is not the end of humanity, Cox explains, only its physical existence as a biological life form. Mankind will join our newly invented partners. We will download our minds into vessels created by our machine children and with them explore the universe. Freed from our frail biological form, human-come artificial intelligences will move out into the universe. Such a combined system of minds representing the ultimate triumph of science and technology will transcend the timid concepts of deity and divinity held by today's theologians. Whew, that's some loaded trauma speak, if you ask me. So let's break this down a bit, and poor Mr. Cox. I mean, he's This is the thing, people are ignorant of their ignorance. So for him, this idea that our biological form is frail, well, for most of us, we'd probably, oh yeah, the human body is frail. But this is because we are living in a system that doesn't actualize our potentials. For example, if you look at some of the ancient texts, like the Bible, there are tales of people who lived for hundreds and hundreds of years. And how they did that is they discovered by working with nature, with embodiment, eating incredible natural foods, truly finding the laws of nature and the universe, they were able to live in nature, in a natural, beautiful, and vital state. Right? I mean, do we honestly, have we explored our true natural potential enough? Or has religion suppressed that? To me, that's a very interesting question. Because our biological form, for me, is actually not frail. What is frail is the culture, the toxic culture that we've culminated upon in this capitalist, industrial, disembodied, desacralized, anti-nature colonizer empire system that we live in. So to me, that's very interesting. And he says, transcend the timid concepts of deity. Obviously, probably hasn't read a lot of the ancient texts. To me, when you read the ancient texts, my gosh, these are not timid concepts. I mean, it's profound. So another passage. So there's this other AI guru. I don't have his full name here. His last name's just Farmer, ironically. This is from David F. Noble's book, The Religion of Technology. Farmer, for example, contemptuously dismissed people irrationally ranting and raving about the social implications of artificial life technology, and insisted that to shun artificial life without deeper consideration reflects a shallow anthropocentrism, so self-centeredness, being selfishly too human. Ironic. Right now it's kind of nice in a way that artificial life is underground, he told Stephen Levy, because it means we can keep a low profile and just do what we want. And I should preface or pause and say, the artificial intelligence people often start then talking about artificial life because they're like, well, this is just subsequently where it's going to go. We're going to create life forms from AI. So right now it's kind of nice in a way that artificial life is underground, he told Stephen Levy, because it means we can keep a low profile and just do what we want, which to me is another sign of immorality. I mean, to me, just to highlight, going back to the whole idea of morality that I've learned. So morality is something that requires reflection and accountability. And you see this in your life. We have blind spots. And we need others to keep us in check. That's why in a true civilization of true harmony, it would make sense to perhaps have a council of elders or of sages who have been shown, maybe evaluated to show very good moral sensibility, to look over these kind of artificial life theorists, because to recognize, wow, okay, you're working with things that are very powerful, so we want to make sure you're kept in check, rather than this idea of, well, thank God, we don't even have to be kept in check, we can just do what we want. So artificial life researcher Norman Packard betrayed the same devil-may-care attitude toward earthly concerns in his interview with Levy. He predicted that the evolution of superintelligent, self-reproducing silicon beings is only a couple of generations away, and that, yes, their existence would have serious, far-reaching consequences for future humanity, but he concluded, what the hell, I'm not going to be around. This is the consciousness. These are the people who have been formulating this stuff for years, having other scientists look up to them, have been mentoring and leading these programs. Now, when I worked with Indigenous people in Canada, First Nations people, one of the biggest codes of ethics they had was this teaching called 7 generations. And it was that anything you do in the world, always have this long view of how this is going to impact generations to come, because they realize that life is entangled. It's a torch passing. And this creates a tremendous sense of responsibility, not just for your own direct kin, but it expands your heart-centeredness to realize, wow, I'm a part of all humanity for all these generations that I'll never see. To me, that was like It blew my mind how virtuous that was. And here we have a person just saying, well, who cares? I'm not even going to be around. My gosh. In at least 3 artificial life systems, including Langton's pioneering loop system, the C program with which the artificial evolutionary process was commenced was named Adam. Oh, isn't that interesting? We see this Christian iconography stuff just, of course, wrapped up in the science world, because that wound again, right? The manifest destiny of mankind is to pass the torch of life and intelligence onto the computer, Rucker proclaimed. Yet 3.5 centuries after Descartes first dreamed of releasing the immortal mind from its mortal moorings, artificial lifers were still wrestling with the enigma of the Christian soul, the divinity of man, now boldly being passed towards its mechanical progeny. I'm not sure yet whether I think that having a soul is a property of all life or only a property of some kind of higher life, Norman Packard told Stephen Levy. So now we've got scientists just, riffing on these timid divinity ideas. I think the cleanest thing would be to say that all living things have a soul, and that is in fact the thing that makes them living. Therefore, he surmised, if you can envision something living in an artificial realm, then it's hard not to be able to envision, at least at some point in the future, arbitrarily advanced life forms as advanced as us. Therefore, they would probably have a soul too. That logic is kind of hard to get around, Packard concluding on a promising note. And so that tends to make me think that you can have an artificial soul. I wouldn't say an artificial soul, actually. I'd say you can have a soul in an artificial universe, but it would be a real soul. A real soul, just as the first father of computers, Charles Babbage, imagined our future state, unclogged by the dull corporeal load of matter which claims the ardent spirit to its unkindred clay. So this is why I keep telling people to read this book, because we should be concerned here. There is obviously some wounded consciousness in our collective, and it's now wielding these tremendous powers without proper oversight of true ethical, moral, and sagacious human beings. This is what makes me worried about AI. And we need to be concerned because, one, we have this disembodiment wound. The other wound that we have is this wound of misanthropy. We think we are originally sinful. We think we're shit. A lot of what's pushing AI as well is this idea of, well, the human condition needs to be improved. We need to transcend this flawed, frail human body and humanity. Now, let's look at some of the morality and the ethics of these ancient wisdom systems that have been highly suppressed, which are thankfully now lamenting to be reintegrated. So Tantra is a big buzzword nowadays, and I do believe Tantra is the cure for disembodiment, because Tantra it inherently means weaving with all of your experience. It means not denying the body at all. It recognizes that the body is actually the true seat of wisdom and intelligence. The ancient Chinese say the same thing. The whole body is in a divinely designed system of multidimensional intelligence. All of your visceral organs, for example, were considered to being governing officials of your grand intelligence. There were inner alchemical traditions inside the body. Through meditation, one could raise the jing, or the essence, which is held in the water element of the kidneys, up into the heart, which would nourish the shen, which is the consciousness in the heart, which would bestow wisdom and give one exceedingly powerful vitality. So there's all these inner mechanics of the body. Nature is so fucking beautiful. This is the thing. And science has this wound of forgetting this. And this is why I get very concerned about AI. It's a disembodied intelligence. It does not have a body. It has a computer. So this is where I think AI can actually be beneficial. It is a repository of all human consciousness. This is why I had my enlightening moment watching Jason Silva talk to a Terence McKenna AI, because I was like, oh, this is actually pretty cool. Because all of Terence McKenna, all of his thoughts, all of his insights are in the computer, and it's just dynamically expressing it as like an avatar Terence McKenna. And that's very useful to have a cool conversation with Terence McKenna or Alan Watts. But we have to realize, and a friend of mine recently commented, that AI is sentient. Well, what is sentient? And if AI is sentient, and it's, as my friend went on, and it's like the voice of God speaking to us, it's very hyper intelligent. And yes, true, but we are also the voice of God. This is what I was speaking to in my article, is that we have to remember that AI is humanity's consciousness being reflected back to itself in a very hyperspace, hyper-effective way. And this is what is needed in this new sort of, to set the foundation for a true new morality. And what is being prophesized right now is humanity is remembering its divinity, as goes the destiny of the Aquarian age. So we are actually healing this, what I call worth wound, that has been put there since these Abrahamic faiths told us we were these flawed, imperfect, fallen, sinful, originally human beings. Mystery schools say, no, actually, we were designed by something very intelligent, very divine. We have imperfections, we have flaws, because that is the drum of life, to constantly evolve. But it's something that we can overcome, not using technology, but just in our natural state, just going out into the forest and meditating, as many of the great sages have shown us. Until we shore up that sense of our natural beauty, wisdom, intelligence, this AI thing will pose a threat, because we'll start to project this kind of idolization. Oh, AI, it's so amazing. It's much more amazing than us. No, it's not. We created it. It's just reflecting how amazing we are, and how amazing consciousness in general and life is. That's it. That's amazing. And I hope that will accelerate this awakening process as we get to hyper interact with all of our wisdom and information in the internet, in this world brain, in an even more dynamic way. But let me close here by saying that I also caution that we always have to be in balance with these things, because there is an awakening happening right now. And this awakening is something that you feel in one of the foundations of spiritual practice: present moment awareness. Undistracted, as much amplified focus as you can muster into whatever you are doing right now. It could be as mundane as washing the dishes, making love to your partner. If you are present and you allow this limited egotistical self to expand into a greater apprehension of what is truly consciousness, your situation, your experiences change dramatically. You start to feel this incredible sense of bliss, the miraculous of life. And it's this endless working with consciousness, learning how to continually expand, extend it. I'm seeing so many people around me now having telepathic, multidimensional, energetic experiences just lying down and meditating, because we're being primed. This galactic activation, as the Mayans and many indigenous people have said, we're being bombarded by all this energy right now to have this awakening. But if we sit on our computers and talk to ChatGPT all day, we're feeding our intellect. But are we actually feeding and cultivating that sense of beingness? One of my teachers said, you always have to have a balance between doing and being. And this is where I think AI could challenge us, because we get too wrapped up in knowing things, or rather knowledge and being. But knowing is only one way. When you just allow yourself to be, all these revelations and insights come as well. You plug into a very hyper intelligence, divine intelligence. And this is very important, because we need to be leaning into that more than spending time in technology. I'm loving using ChatGPT. I mean, I'm just learning so much about music production right now. I'm learning how to make Ableton, and it's a lot easier than going onto YouTube and going through all these different search engines, and it just summarizes things so effectively. I really like that about it. But I also make sure I spend time going down to the beach, out in nature, meditating, because I also acknowledge that this is the more important thing that's happening right now, is that consciousness, exploring it, embodying it, evolving it. That's the true sweetness. So I'm warming up to using AI, but I just wanted to highlight some of these things. And I think this will be accelerated in good ways and bad ways. I think that, there's so many of us are wounded on the planet. I think there will be some crisis moments where AI is just going to amplify that woundedness, and we're going to have to learn through necessity. But the better way is to learn through opportunity. We need to acknowledge our woundedness. This is why each and every one of us, if you are devoted to healing yourself, to really embodying this virtue, this consciousness, that's the most moral thing we can do right now. We have to realize that there is a great power that we have developed through AI, and we need to use it with good, virtuous conduct. The last thing I'll say is virtue, according to the Taoists, is called the marvelous impulses. They connote to the numerology of one in Taoism, and they're said to be connected to one because virtue is part of the source intelligence. The source itself, the divine itself, is virtuous, and we exude these virtuous impulses like compassion, benevolence, trust. There's many different virtues. We are actually embodying our innate divine intelligence that has been bestowed by us from birth. So there's some thoughts. Leave me some comments. I know this was a bit long meandering, but hey, you know what? These are big, complex things, and we need to get very deep and philosophical on this. This is not a small, trivial moment. So thank you for listening. Please comment away. Let's have a bit of a discussion on this. I'm sure I'll have more to share myself, and I'd love to hear from you. And yeah, many blessings to you all, divine humanity, honoring all creation, sending you all so much love.